All right, so it's now time to move on to the next panel discussion, one which I'm the most excited for, actually. This is titled as Designing for Better Future. The last 2 years has brought about a 360 degrees change in the way we look at design. And it's now time to focus on what really matters. For this panel, I am happy to introduce Sumisha Gilotra, the editor of Architect and Interiors India, one of ITP Group's flagship publications, and even if I say myself, one of the most respectable industry focused magazines on architecture and interior design today. With this, I would love to also introduce the other panel members who are joining us here today. We have with us Mr. Sanjay Puri, who is the principal architect at Sanjay Puri Architects. We have with us Mr. Ravi Sarangan, the director at Edifice Consultants. Also joining them are Amit Gupta, the founding partner at Studio Symbiosis. Joining the panel is also Mr. Hiren Patel, the principal architect at Hiren Patel Architects, and Mr. Arjun Malik, who is also the principal architect at Malik Architecture. We also have joining them Ms. Dinah Kellogg, who is the principal at Dinah Kellogg Architects all the way from New York. And with this, I'm quickly going to hand this over to you, Sumisha, to take on this panel and take this forward. Over to you, Sumisha.
Thank you, Rashmi, and a very warm welcome to all our panelists. Design for a better future. What do we really mean by that? Should we make our buildings sustainable, green? Should we dwell into the past and pay homage to our traditional architecture? Or should we embrace technology and create state-of-the-art architecture that is at par with global trends? Should we break the mold and go ahead and show the world what India is capable of? We have some of the brightest minds in the industry on our special panel today. So on this panel, we're going to shake things up a bit, and I'm going to urge each of our panelists to not just talk about, but showcase what they believe is design for a better future. Ravi, shall we start with your thoughts on design for a better future?
Yeah, thank you, Sumisha. Do you want me to share my screen, or you've got it loaded onto? So just give me a second. Yes, okay. Thank you, Rashmi, and thank you, Sumisha, for the introduction, and hi to everyone. So, Design for a Better Future, I could choose one of our projects, which we are doing for the Ministry of Renewable Energy at Delhi, and was a competition which was held about 2 years back, just before Corona, and we won it. And the building is almost ready now for interior fit-outs. So the brief given to us was that they wanted a net positive building. Why have I chosen this? Because that's your future. Future is not net zero. Future is probably net positive and going beyond, net zero. And I'm going to talk to you about the concept that we had presented. And the good part is, I think the concept has not been diluted and it remains the way it is. So just hold on a second. So this was named after the ex-Prime Minister. It's called Patel Urja Bhavan, spread across 2.76 acres. They wanted, as any other client, an iconic landmark. And the brief given to us is because it was the renewable energy headquarters, to achieve a net zero and go beyond it. So the site was strategically located. It was wonderful to bag a project in the capital of this country. And is dotted by landmarks, proximity to the metro rail, to institutions, and very close to the Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium. So we hypothetically created an axis where it stood, and we did a SWOT analysis of the site. The unfortunate part was it was along the north-south axis, so there was a huge western orientation that we had to tackle. We had a very sliver of a small portion of the site, which was hugging the main road, but we had a subsidiary road on the southern side. So great location, and proximity to public transport. So I could really do wonders with using public transport and thereby reducing the parking to the facility. The threats, of course, in Delhi being the pollution, security, because being a government building. An opportunity was probably this was the second building. The first building is a net zero building in Delhi. This was the second building, which would be a net zero plus if it becomes energy positive, and we are confident that we will achieve it. It will be the first one of its kind in Delhi. What we did as a simple strategy was, how did we evolve the planning. So we wanted to celebrate the frontage. We wanted to create a public edge. What we then did is we established the footprint, and then we created an atrium because there were two distinct departments sitting in this space. And then what we did was we, of course, got the building tilted to the geometry, which gave me, a great northeast light. And we wanted to enhance the entry experience rather than having a right angle entry. We wanted an angular entry. And what we did then was to shield the west by introducing the service core. So the way the program was strategized in terms of massing is we placed all the public and semi-public, activities on the lower ground and ground floor. And so that then it gave us, an office which was free of visitors on the upper levels. So we had a requirement for a large auditorium and a creche. We also created a public edge, a pavilion to showcase what the Ministry of Renewable Energy was doing on a week-on-week or a month-on-month basis. The first floor was the double height auditorium, and we took the canteen in the gym on the first level. The second level, we took the training facilities, that's your classrooms. They also had a requirement for guest houses. So the canteen spread across 2 floors. And then we established the main service core, the circulation cores, which came as a vertical mass in the hinge in the center. This being in Delhi, and therefore we had to take care of the western facade. So what we did was we created the core, the toilet blocks, the AHUs, etc., as a screen. But then we also had to celebrate the wind movement there. So we created these voids which allowed for lighted ventilation. And it allowed some amount of cross ventilation for the atrium that we had created. And then we had these typical floors from 3rd to 6th floors, which was, they have these grades in the government, A, B, and C grade offices. And then these were all typical floors. And then the 7th and 8th floors were given for their alliance partners. That is, they are members of the International Solar Alliance, the Association of Renewable Energy Agencies of States, and International Solar Alliance. So those were given to the top 2 floors. And the topmost floors was reserved for the minister. One side was the ministers, and the other side was for the Minister of State. So that was reserved for the top level. What we then did as a strategy was to house, obviously, when you have to rely on renewable energy, we went in for solar panels, which we housed on the terrace floor on top. So this was a very simple strategy. And when we presented to the ministry, we want to make it completely idiot-proof. And that's how we showed the evolution of the design. Then we had to think about the facade strategy. So what we did was, since there was no building in the southern side in front, we were falling short of area for the solar panels. So we introduced a vertical solar strategy as well, which was called the solar well on the solar wall. And what it did was it took care of my energy needs, the solar wall as well as the rooftop strategy. And that was it had to belong to Delhi. So therefore it had to belong to that circle. So we had to use materials which are sourced from in and around North India. And sandstone was used as a facade strategy, and the solar panels, you see it on the top. What we did for the eastern facade was we had to take care of the morning heat. So what we did was we had glazing, and then we introduced a kind of a screen in front on which we started growing creepers. And therefore, it kept the heat ingress low. And that's how the creeper strategy was introduced, behind which is the glazing. So that was the eastern facade. And then in the forefront, you see the Urja Pavilion, which I mentioned earlier was a public realm to keep the public engaged. And that was the entry into the building, to the auditorium on the left. We had to take care of the west, and west. Rahul Mehrotra has done this in Hyderabad, where you have this builders, developers headquarters, where he had designed a floor plate with an extended balcony where he grew creepers. So what we did was something similar, and we wanted to give a very breathing facade. So almost all of them were dead walls, but we had these punchers. You remember I talked about some amount of ventilation to the common areas. So this was our strategy for the western facade. So predominantly dead facade, but then we had these, decks with greenery creepers growing on top of it. And then a closer look at the western facade, and you see the solar panels on the roof and on the east, southern sides. an aerial view of this development. So what we did was also on the roof below my solar panels, we had a roof garden. So we had 3-stage evaporative coolers, and we used the plants, biophilia, for the purification of the air. Pollution is rampant in Delhi. So what we did was, for exterior and interior, we introduced biophilia. So we have this great example of Kamal Mittal on the right, where it's a Paharpur business center where Kamal Mittal has used plenty of indoor plants to keep the air quality. So we're using this instead of expensive air conditioning filters. The air that is going through to my evaporator cooler is also being filtered by plants. And therefore, we use common sense. First is orientation, best orientation, so that you get your energy demand, energy consumption lowered. We use light shelves so that daylight penetration is more. We use vertical biofilms for glare control and fresh air. We use cavity walls for all the wall sections. Indoor fresh air up to 17% reduction in cooling. We enhance the solar panel area by taking it on the roof. The window wall ratio is maintained at 27 degrees centigrade. And therefore, what you have at the end of the day is a glorious building. The building is almost complete. A small portion of our fee is kept aside for energy calculations. We have taken this as a challenge that we are going to give you an energy net positive building. And once it's operational, we're going to see probably the first building in Delhi which is energy positive. So that's, Sumisha, my take on what the future should be. You reduce your demand. We've reduced it immensely. So the air conditioning is restricted to only the floor plates, and it's all radiant cooling. It's not a conventional cooling. It's all radiant cooling, and the amount of, and we did, even daylight simulation, almost every single space gets natural light, glare-free light. So we hope to create a landmark in Delhi, Akshay Urja Bhavan, probably in 2000. This was, of course, in 2016. Because of Corona, this project was delayed. But that's our take on future of architecture.
That's fantastic, Ravi, and it does look absolutely stunning and something that we definitely need. Clearly, you're very, very focused on energy efficiency for the future. That's one of the most important parameters for you. But if I had to tell you, besides energy efficiency, if you had to name 3 more parameters that you want to include in your design for the future, what would they be?
So water, waste, and food is going to be scarce. So, we're taking too much land away and for real estate development. Where's the food going to come in from? So I think we need to borrow some examples from the Netherlands and other cities in Netherlands as to how they're growing their food. For me, any natural resource, the minute we try to exploit it, we're going to have a bleak future. So it's necessary to look after water, waste, as well as food.
Absolutely agree with you. We will circle back and probably come back to this. Sure. But for now, I would love to see what Arjun has to share. Malik architecture particularly has been a lot about creating organic looking spaces. So let's see what Arjun has to showcase us.
Hi, Arjun.
Hi. Hi, Ravi. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm going to just quickly jump into it and share my screen. Yeah. So I think we're dealing with a very, very delicate subject when we talk about something as expansive as design for a better future. But I do think that Ravi did sum up a lot of it, which is finally, and I will kind of further simplify it into finding balance with our environment and between ourselves. Can be essentially summed up as one word: balance or equilibrium. And in order to achieve that, I think what we tend to do is, irrespective of the situation of the project, we start to articulate some sort of a matrix, right? And it's not very deterministic. I think the way it's interpreted and the way the framework gets interpreted is fundamental. But to look at this confluence of factors of, and I think they're mentioned here, this, regional and cultural issues and social and functional, physical, metaphysical, climate. We are working in the subcontinent, which has a very rich history, both of extant building traditions and of, deeply complex social relationships. So I'm going to use, like Ravi did, but two smaller examples, try and express how one would approach a particular situation. The first is, I know it's called a mixed-use building, but it didn't start that way. It's a project in the center of in Cochin in Kerala. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the region. Everyone is probably very familiar with these images. You know, the tourism marketing keep talking about God's own country, and I think for the past 15 to 20 years, I have been visiting there on and off, and it's a wonderful place. And I think the beauty of it is that the architecture has evolved. I think whether it's Korea or it's any region of the country, you find very, very sophisticated references to all this that we spoke about. And I think somewhere as, as practices, it's kind of incumbent upon us to understand the evolution of the built environment and the balance that has existed for so many centuries in each of these regions to try and evaluate and then perhaps question the notion of tradition being this fixed point in time, or tradition simply being ultimately a set of innovations that is looking for the next logical evolutionary step. So even if we look at these images and you can see the greenery and, I would say the older architecture, the older built environments in these spaces all evolved in the shade of the trees. There was nothing tall. They worked with terracotta, mangalore tiles, they worked with brick, they worked with streets, courtyards, everything within the shade of the trees, ultimately building an environment that was sympathetic to the climate, right? And to the social patterns of that region. Now, we actually got a very, very interesting site, a 1.5 acre site right in the center of Cochin. And there's a metro line that passes to the west of the site, to the bottom edge. Now, it's very interesting to see that there are two sets of diagrams highlighted here. One, if you look to the top left of the image, you can see these little green, blocks. These are the original work and dwelling units of that region. And if you come closer to that red dotted line, which is the main metro and the road, you can see the gigantic gray masses, which are now concentrated built areas coming up along the primary commercial arterial network. So you're actually starting to see that all of the accumulated intelligence of the past, which are these loosely formed networks, which allow sun and air and in-between spaces, etc., are all now giving way to this kind of more generic concentrated super block. So the idea is can we, look at the building program and start to, in essence, learn from the past and, project into the future. Now, all of this cannot happen in a vacuum. It requires a situation where all the stakeholders, right, are also open to dialogue. Now, the project is for Mathrubhumi. It's a very, very well-known media communications network. They do radio, they have a entertainment channel, they publish, they have an online presence. So what they were basically looking to do in this project was to consolidate their global network, which is all of Kerala and Dubai, their sales and management structure, into a single site, whilst also keeping their local operations in Cochin, which requires a heavy daily interface with the city. So it's broken up into two parts, right? There's something which requires daily interface with the city, and there's something which is then more of an oversight over their global program. So what we did was we managed to isolate those two programs, and after numerous conversations with the client, seeing as ultimately how they're a communications company, and also to add, the client is a member of parliament and is doing a lot of social work in this area, we distributed those areas in such a way we kept their core daily program on the ground, to their global program into the trees. And what that did was it opened up a tremendous amount of. It then talked to client and said, can we let, because this is the sub has, I think, dominated, in blurring those thresholds between public and private. We see our problems of disappearing civic space. And the client was very open to it, provided that we could also make it economically sustainable. So we simply started to look at programs that would, enhance the public domain, as well as, be able to plug into the client's commercial network, which is through an auditorium, through incubation spaces. They're into publishing, so a library and bookstore, a cafe, and a small space for gallery and an art gallery and an artist residency. These were some of the first concept sketches that start from the metro to the left, and trying to really kind of dual architecture that happened with the city coming into the under the tree line within the shade of the trees, and then something that starts. The entire kind of ground network works around these public programs around loosely connected courtyards and shaded spaces. You can see the dotted lines which express the workspaces on the upper level, essentially sitting on these kind of forms and opening out onto terraces. What it basically does is it also questions the notion of how architecture and the ground can connect. We normally expect buildings to simply move from the ground vertically upwards, but based on the building program, the gaps between spatial and constructional logics and the landscape can actually completely mutate the way architecture behaves, let's say, under, within, and above the trees. And from a material perspective, we're working with the Laurie Baker Foundation. We're designing most of the structure in load-bearing brick. The upper levels are an echo of the Fort Cochin with the north lights with steel joists and brick arches. So again, I think once again, perhaps sitting in opposition to the idea that the moment you make multi-storied architecture, you have to immediately revert to conventional or industrialized building types, wherein you can really start to work with the local materials. If you do that, you start to pull upon these very strong local networks and intelligences, whether it's the skilled masons, the bricklayers, and other teams like that. And the first sketches that are developing, we're talking about 8 and 9 meter tall, freestanding brick volumes with structural cobalt and the jack arches, the steel sections. So it's quite an interesting thing that talks not only about, the relevance to the climate, but its regional context, its ability to, intertwine, public and private program. Yes, the floating art gallery. So again, it's just about opening up the ground in a very indeterminate way to let life actually happen, because most of these climates, all you need is a roof and the shade of the trees, and life can happen quite sympathetically within those shaded environments. And those are some of the internal workspaces. Again, everywhere there's familiarity with history, but the sense not of copying, but perhaps of projecting it into the future. Sumisha, do I have 2 minutes more, or should I stop here?
I'd like to ask you a question, actually. That I see
Go
that
ahead.
a lot of designers have begun using traditional for its true essence in the contextual build human process format, with very little damage done to the surroundings, which I think is great and which is what you've showcased as well. But I also see that today traditional comes into play only places a lot of times where technology doesn't exist, but it's simply too expensive. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you think that we can actually use traditional in a more urban metro kind of an environment?
Cool. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to answer your question by running through slides, not talking about the project, but answering your question, right? I don't think the place and access to technology is the issue here. I think in most places in India, right, you are going to find very, very sophisticated construction technologies, but perhaps its application to different building types, right, has been consigned to history simply because we haven't applied ourselves to the subject, right? So whether you're working with stones or bricks, or you're working with rammed earth, or you're working with bamboo or wood, I think it's really about taking global information networks, and we have access to all kinds of technology, engineering all across the world, but applying it to very robust local skill sets and local materials, right? And I think that's the issue of sustainability comes in, Sumisha, because I think, clients keep asking me about, leads and stuff, and I always rubbish leads because how do you evaluate the sustainability of the simple construction of rammed earth and bamboo and something that is, the passive design and its core material components and construction have pretty much zero carbon footprint. And all we're trying to do is apply metrics. But I think this country has a history of immensely sustainable design, right? Which I think it is our responsibility to learn from. Now, how we can apply it, whether it echoes, the past, whether it projects into the future, right? A simple example like this, we've built a house with one material. It's a basement plus 3-level house built in solid stone, built with the local village teams. The quarry is 15 minutes away. The stones are unprocessed. We've gone back to splitting stones instead of, using those massive gang saws which eliminate all texture. But the reason we even chanced upon this process is for economic reasons. Building a house in solid stone in Rajasthan is actually cheaper than doing it in a concrete frame, brick infill, stone claddings, and doing all your plastering and chasing and painting and false ceilings. Here, cavity walls, space for services, no applied textures, no false ceilings, everything built and cut by hand. And you have something with a carbon footprint that is a fraction of what we would call a conventional structure, right? And with temperature performances where you have between 8 to 10 degree differences between outside and inside, and all basically calling upon the past, but engineering it for the future.
Absolutely agree with you. In fact, honestly, I would love to see more and more of such projects, such architecture in our cities, because like you rightly pointed out, yes, a lot of people are building second homes, etc., which are very contextual, very traditional. People are looking at alternatives, people are going back to the roots. But I think our cities still need to sort of, looking forward, we must bring in that kind of architecture within our cities as well. Do you agree with me?
150%. If it doesn't start to get a wide-scaled, if it doesn't come back into the mainstream, it's always going to be a kind of marginalized other, which means the effect is always going to be, a little thing here, a little thing there. But I think there is adequate proof, right, that the problem is not with the available technologies or the costing or the availability of skill sets. The accountability finally lies with our profession and our engineering profession, who are basically taking shortcuts and essentially decorating our buildings to make them look one way or the other, but without any real core content. I mean, you get the passive design right, done. You can keep plugging in rainwater harvesting systems. Yeah.
Sorry, go on. You can finish that.
Yeah, you can keep plugging in technologies, but I think for me, if you look at a project, if you simply consider for a moment that you had the constraints of no electricity, right, which means no pumps, no ACs, no lights, how would you design that structure? And then where you are falling short, you can plug in these mechanical interfaces. But if you assume that I can solve every problem with solar panels and air conditioning and lighting, you maybe kind of forget some of the most fundamental aspects of design, which is, equilibrium of man, built environment, and natural environment. If you keep these three things in mind, a lot of the fluff will go out and you'll start to look at more core content.
Absolutely. In fact, you've answered my question in advance. So I'm going to move on and probably like to hear from architect Hiren Patel, who comes from the Mecca of architecture in Ahmedabad. Mr. Patel, Amrita, can we have Mr. Patel's presentation? Yes.
A lot of the fluff will go out and you'll
Mr. Patel, you're not very audible. Arjun, you'll have to.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Good now, yes.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And thank you for this lovely discussion. I'm on the way. Yeah, I'm on the road, so maybe bear with me with little weak signals if it comes across. I was just thinking that what is the future? And let's say pandemic has really taught us that there is a core between. Okay, so all our grandparents and everybody has lived into the villages, and they were all comfortable, they were all healthy, and they had no complaint with the life. Now we all have moved from village to the cities, and it's like a little trap that now we want everything air conditioned, we require everything with artificial lights on, and yeah, I mean there are always the beauty of artificial light as well, but then somehow we are getting so much engrossed to the life. Man-made created the environment, and we are getting cut off with the nature, and that's the kind of aspect I am just trying to understand how shall we go back to the nature. And in simple language, how can we bring the village life or village into the cities? I mean all the people who live into the city, they love to go in countryside and they had a wonderful time, and they really feel regenerated. So basically our connection to the nature is the prime thing, and how we bring it. to be written, or it doesn't have to be a very fine material palette. So at the moment, I'm frankly speaking, I'm also in dilemma of the career of 30 years of practice, and I'm just thinking that how can we create where there is no, how can we create the architecture and how there actually there is no architecture. I mean, no, I mean, when we go and see the small machan in the farmland, the farmer is working and resting. So that's his office, and there's a lot of architecture, but it's so beautiful architecture. How can we see the village house? You see the house, nothing to talk about, but still yet more refined. You go to any part of India, and you go to the villages either in Himalayas, in Kerala, or Rajasthan, or Gujarat, or Assam. I mean, or Nagaland. I mean, absolutely something that. So this is a very small project we created for the working environment. You can go to the next image, please. So it's basically an office, and we thought that let's create the office like a home, where in the general home you have lots of veranda space, where in office you never have verandas, you never have a balcony. So we thought we will have almost exact the proportion of the semi-covered space and the covered space in this office. It's a ground story building only. So we create a lot more outdoor spaces for the office, and there are only 4 cube of covered office, and we thought it will be full of artwork and sculptures and garden all around. So it's basically a cluster of 4 glass tubes covered with the free flow of the roof, having a veranda space in between with the courtyard, and all garden all around. Next one. Yeah, so here in the sketch, maybe you can see the 4 yellow cubes. There are the 2 are the office cabins for the directors. One can say one is a conference room, and one area is for the staff to work on. And so this is the office. You can see the one of the covered cube, and the right hand side is the open veranda kind of space. We created this curve kind of form for the roof because we really wanted to have not very powerful impact of architecture form, and we wanted to have more focus on the landscaping. And we thought we create the edges in a such a way that which is like least hurt to the eyes. That's how the curve format of the roof came, and it's all white steel pillars and frameless glass all around.
That was incredible, Hiren.
Yeah. So I think, see, I mean, it is always go back and see how people you see. It's like as a designer, you would design something, you have lots of things, but you have to go back to the office and see, and you actually discover a lot more things. Now, these clients are very simple people, and I say, actually, we should, I mean, don't become so greedy and keep your office like your office. Why don't you have an art show or some upcoming artists to have a art show in your place, and it will be wonderful. And I think we are also going to take that initiative. This is quite early images. Now the garden around is completely growing so beautiful, and you are almost like living into the forest kind of space. And surprisingly, they say whoever comes to our office for 15-20 minutes meeting, they end up almost staying 1.5 hours to 2 hours because they love to be at this place. And second, they realize that everybody feels so calm to work at this place. Yeah, next one, please. Yeah, I mean, the idea was to create the lots of beautiful garden around the building, which complements to the building itself. Yeah. So now, if I go back and see this thing, I mean, I really want to still. I mean, see, there is still an architect's mind working. I'm still in my next journey of architecture. I really want architecture without architecture, and frankly speaking, I don't have Q. I'm just wondering that if I compare this, the water features and the pebbles here, and if I compare with the water stream in the Himalayas, I think there is an ego of an architect. I really want to erase that and come out with the architect which is so subtle, and it's very difficult to find kind of thing. I mean, that kind of philosophy of design I'm designing for going for my own learning. But yeah, it's a process, and one can maybe fail, but it's always good to just keep on working, and you discover new benchmark in your life. Next one, please. Yeah, so you see from inside also we have kind of furniture pieces which also have free form. It's all customized with all local with the local carpenters. Nothing has been imported or something like that. I mean, even the client would have afford that. we thought it would be good to have simple furniture because, and if you see the flooring is also very subtle and simple with concrete flooring. This is the conference room, and now the surrounding landscaping has already grown. I recently visited, and you don't see the movement all around the plot because the peripheral plantation has really gone almost double than what you see now. Next one. Yeah, there is a beautiful artwork sculpture by the artist called Apurva Desai. So we just hired one artist and we kept lots of sculpture of using because we don't have the wall into this space. So we have some painting on easel and most of the artwork is all sculptures all around. And we call this building Amoeba.
I think that was fantastic. And we've had Ravi who's spoken about energy efficiency. We've had Arjun who's focused more on going back to the traditional. And of course, Mr. Patel who spoke about being one with nature and creating projects that sort of sync with the surroundings as well. Let's hear it from you, Amit, on what do you think is designed for a better future?
So first of all, I think it was really nice to hear all the other panelists speaking. And really, sustainability is what we should strive for going forward. So when we're speaking about design for a better future, for us, it's about symbiotic ecologies. It's about creating architecture which is in symbiosis with the surroundings in terms of natural materials or in terms of energy sustainability, like what the other people are actually speaking about right now. So first of all, before we speak about the future, I just want to discuss what is the present. So this is the present condition right now, where the ice caps have melted. Polar bears will be endangered. Antarctic ice is melting away. The corals are all bleached throughout the world. 95% corals are bleached. So right now, I think what's happening is these effects of global warming, they have not reached humans right now. The other species, we can see the effect in other species. And where us as architects come into picture, is that if you look at the overall CO2 emission, if you see the overall CO2 emission in the emission by sectors, then architecture constitutes to almost 40% of it. So now if we are such a big contributor to this, so now as architects, what we're looking at is really for us in our office, we're looking at creating performance-driven architecture. Architecture which has a meaning and which really...
Ciao. Senti, volevo chiederti, non so se è una roba che compete a te. Io
Enrico, can you please mute yourself?
No? L'ho fatto quella forzata perché c'erano ballato un file, sono sempre quelle robe che...
Can we please meet Mr. Del Rosso?
E riavvia più il Outlook, quello della posta. Cioè, lo clicco, no?
Can we please mute the other panelists?
La schermata ho riavviato, spento,
Can we please mute the other panelists?
Devo sentire forse più il Claudio.
Mohit, Tulika, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem. So I think the place where I was reaching was that architecture for us is really about performance-driven architecture, and sustainability should be at the core of the architecture going forward. So one of the projects which we are just sharing with you, which is called the Peak at the Udaipur, it's a hotel project. It's a resort. It's around 2-acre site. And here we're speaking about form follows performance, because there's age-old dilemma between form follows function and function follows form. But we're speaking about form follows performance. So it's not about only the look and feel of the architecture, but as architects, if you look at the numbers, we are one of the biggest contributors to the CO2 footprint, the carbon footprint on the planet. So in this particular project, we have tried to assimilate some of the things which we were discussing earlier. So we are looking at climate responsive architecture in terms of solar studies, wind studies, then locally sourced materials. So all the material used here is within 5 kilometers of the site. Then the villas itself, we have nested them in the earth. So basically it's creating form without form. That's what we're looking at in this particular project, and reducing the heat gain of the project and also looking at wind movement. So based on Udaipur, what we have done is we have looked at the local patterns. And also we thought there should be some kind of integration reflection in the architecture based on where it is based in. So in Udaipur, we took this hexagonal base grid, which is very evident in some of the Jali work which is done there. So this became a starting point for us. This is the existing site. So unfortunately, what the client had done, it's a beautiful surroundings like you see in the background. But the client had cut the entire site into steppings. He thought it's easier to do a step site and it will be easy for construction. So the first thing which we did was look at the original contours of the site. So we restructured the site again to the original contours. And on this, we overlaid the hexagonal grid. So we wanted to have a primary and secondary grid to control the architectural geometry. So it was a system which has been overlaid on the entire site. And then further, this inclined step, because the client has anyway cut the site. So we are not really reconstructing the site by filling the earth back, because this will be very counterproductive. But the architecture of the site is actually coming from the initial topography. So this inclined area is where the villas are sitting. So it's around 8 or 9 villas which are nested in the inclined zone. And at the entrance, we have the 2 buildings. So there's this reception plus all-day dining and the gym cum spa. So this becomes the entire project. So the idea here was to re-establish the site contours as it was without actually filling. And also because it's in Udaipur, we created something which for us is really this formless form. And then there's the secondary measure of shading using jalis on top of it. Now we were lucky in one case that the wind was actually coming directly from north direction. So these 2 entrance buildings are actually used to channelize the wind. So these create air channels, which when flows over the water bodies, it brings cool air over the villas. And the inclination of the villas, of the site here, it actually accelerates the wind speed and throws the wind more into the villas. It creates a night purge also, and also creates fresh air inside. So now given the heat gain of the building, so every villa is nested inside landscape. So there's nothing which is, there's basically no form in this architecture. So the idea is that nature becomes a form, and earth cooling was something which you're looking at. Earth cooling, not in terms of mechanical cooling, but cooling the villas by placing them inside the earth, by nesting them in the earth. As we all know that the ground temperature is always lower than the outside temperature. And another thing is that all these guys, so the view of the site is where the villas are looking towards. That's where the mountain peaks are. So this is how these 8-9 villas have been spread around the site. And also this is a part of this. So this is one of the newer projects in the office, which I want to show. So this is a post-COVID design. So this is a design we were looking at work from destination. So the villa sizes are 150 square meter. So the idea is that a person, if you give him a 42 square meter room like a Hilton would be, he cannot stay there for long. So it's really a home away from home. That's why there's a huge outdoor area. And then the depth of the rooms is such that you get, it's 8 meters deep, all the villas inside. So you get enough natural light inside, but shaded light. Because in Udaipur, we don't want to shoot up the electricity load, the cooling loads. So this was one of the strategies for this.
Amit, that looks really fantastic. And if you ask me, it's pretty futuristic, the way it looks and feels, and the kind of thought that you have put together. So if I had to ask you to encapsulate in a few words on how you, or maybe give me 5 terms or 5 elements that you would say encapsulate design for the future, in your opinion, what would they be? And then we can conclude.
See, I think design for the future is about materials. They should be, but again, see, every project is different. If I'm making a 200-room Hilton property, I cannot do so much sustainability in it because efficiency is very important and maintenance is a very big aspect. So I think in ideal world, if we speak about 5 top things, it's about locally sourced materials. Simulating, because with computational techniques, we can simulate each and everything, solar angles, wind simulations, everything is simulated. Third thing is really sustainability. Sustainability in terms of looking at the light conditions. For us, it's about this, materials, sustainability, and yeah, performance-driven architecture, really. So anything which you're doing, everything should have a meaning. So for us, it's really about sustainability, actually. Instead of 5, I would just say 2-3 things. It's materials, sustainability, and simulation.
That's absolutely on point. And I do urge most of the young architects who are our audience today to kind of keep all of these aspects in mind while they design and plan for their future and architecture for us. Should we move on to the next presentation, or you have anything else that you would want us to
stop if you want. This is just 1 or 2 simulation slides.
Sure. We'll have a look at those and then we can move on to architecture. Yes.
So this is because it's all about iterating the design. So it was not like you design and it's done. It's really this iterative design which we are going back and forth. So here we're looking at the angles of the inclination of the slope, then the angle of this jali which is coming on top. So here we can see how the wind is flowing through the villas. It's really night purge is also happening in this villas. There's a video, but I think I'll skip it. There's animation, but I think we can go to the next panelist.
That was really very impressive and definitely looks very futuristic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Next, so we've had, like we said, we've touched upon so many elements, and I would like to now see what architect Sanjay Puri has to showcase to us. Can we please have architect Sanjay Puri?
Hi, I'm Sanjay Puri. And today we're talking on the topic for designing the future. I think this is the most pertinent topic considering the kind of changes that the world is seeing, has seen over the past couple of years, and is going to see going ahead in the future. And I think the best way to actually illustrate this topic is to run you through a recent project that we've done, which kind of shows the way one should be designing for the future. So this is a small hotel called the Arya Hotel that we finished in Nasik, which is a 63-room boutique resort. And I'll just take you through this to show you how this was done and why it was done. So this is the Arya Hotel that we finished a year and a half ago. And it actually opened just pre-COVID time. And this is the site. It is a very long linear site on a contoured piece of land which overlooks the lakes on the south. There's a huge river on the south, and it overlooks hills towards the northern side. And there is a slope difference of about almost 12 meters within this site. So you can see the cross section below. And so quickly, when you look at the cross section, you see that the whole existing contour gradually steps up from the view of the lakeside and goes up towards the hills on the south. And this entire design was based on the site itself. So how you relate to a site and how you are contextual to that site in terms of the surroundings, the contours, the climate, and the location. So here what we try to do is we haven't taken a single spade also of mud outside of the site or brought it into the site. Everything is built along the existing contours, and based on the functional requirements, you've got a large banquet space starting at the beginning, which has a direct entry and exit from the outside. And thereafter, sectionally, the hotel steps back and steps up simultaneously. So you're going with the contours and then gradually stepping this as one goes through. And then, as opposed to most hotels, this hotel has all the circulation spaces naturally ventilated through internal courtyard spaces. And the amount of green generated is visible in this section where you see the entire frontage is open, which is for the banquet garden. Then when we step back, we have an elevated garden. Again, you step back, you have a pool level, which is an elevated garden, and then you have courtyards. So when you calculate the entire amount of green space, it is 60%. And then you add all the terraces that have been also made green, then it's almost 100% of the plot has been created as open spaces within the plot. So literally you've made a building, but you've given back 100% in terms of open space. So this is how the rooms gradually step up, and their rooms are very organically laid out. And then they have internal courtyard spaces, and then they twist at every floor. And finally, this is a cross section through the entire site, explaining how the different functions are each opening into their own individual open space. The banquet into its own garden, the restaurant into an elevated garden, the pool at another elevated garden, and then every room has large outdoor balconies which are 8 feet wide, overlooking the hills or the lake. And then right on the top, we have solar panels on the terrace as well as on the parking structures at the ground level. So running you through the plans, this is the ground floor plan with a large banquet garden, and the view is of the banquet garden. The banquet is 20 feet high opening into this garden. And then as you go up from the side road on the right-hand side, you enter the hotel at the first floor level based on the contours. And at the first floor, this is the entrance lobby and the spaces inside that look towards the outside, opening into, again, a very large terrace space. And this is the hotel on the top. Now, the entire organic structure of these rooms was derived from the organic city of Nasik. So if you see, no room is in a straight line. And there are 2 courtyards at the back, one in the front, one in the back, and the entire circulation internally within the hotel is organic, so that one does not feel that it's a box-like structure as most hotels are. So this is a hotel which is, more than 50% of the spaces are naturally ventilated and naturally cooled, and all spaces have ample daylight throughout the day. So the energy required to run this hotel actually is much lower than most hotels. So this is one of the atrium spaces which is naturally ventilated from the top, and all these corridors are naturally ventilated and naturally lit. So 50% of the area is non-air conditioned space within this resort hotel of 63 rooms. This is a cross section showing various green spaces that have been generated within the hotel design. And that's a longitudinal section showing the hotel gradually stepping up and looking out. These are the rooms, very simple rooms, and opening out into these large balconies that offer and frame the outdoor spaces to the inside spaces. This is very briefly the circulation of hot air and cool air within the entire hotel. This is all naturally ventilated, and the atrium roofs have solar panels to generate energy. 50% of the walls of this hotel are made in black basalt stone, which is available on the site itself. So again, in terms of material, in terms of climate, the entire hotel is very contextual to its surroundings. This is the large garden space at the banquet level. And then when you're in the banquet, you have a 24 feet high space looking out towards the garden. This is the entry to the hotel. And this is the lobby where just the pre-lobby area where you enter the hotel from. These are the restaurant and bar opening into this large terrace space. And each of these volumes looks out towards the view at every level. This is the large restaurant garden space with a shallow pool at the end. And this is the spiral staircase that connects the banquet level to the restaurant level. And so there are two of these atrium spaces which are naturally ventilated, as you saw in the plan. So this is the second one. And this is the first one that comes earlier in the plan when you're walking through the hotel. All of this is naturally ventilated. These are clay tiles on the right-hand side, which are open. And this is the pool level. So each one of these hotel floors is twisted at a different angle. So it creates a very sculptural effect for the hotel. And at the same time, each one of these rooms is overlooking different angle views of the outside. These are the hills towards the southern side. So all the rooms on the southern side look out towards these hills. And that's a view of the room. So the entire room is simple, opening up into these large balcony spaces that overlook the outdoors. That's a view again from the room looking out towards the lake and the hills beyond. So these are some more views of the hotel from the outside. All of these blocks are cantilevered by 3 to 3.6 meters. So the hotel is designed in this very sustainable manner where you've generated a large amount of green space. Most of the circulation space is all naturally ventilated. So the energy consumption is very low. In addition to this, 50% of the energy consumption of the hotel is derived from solar panels on top of the roof, as well as the parking spaces. So that's all the spaces where the solar panels have been placed. So the entire operation of running this hotel itself is very low. This is the basalt stone that is used for all 50% of the walls. And this is a very brief video that just takes one through these main spaces of the hotel and the kind of view that it has for all the residents. So basically, this is the way forward. Designing for the future is this, that you take cognizance of the site, of the climate, you reduce the heat gain into the building, you maximize on natural daylight, and you reduce the energy consumption. This is the way forward.
That sounds fantastic, Sanjay. I think this project, I couldn't stop ogling at it, and I can't wait to sort of visit this project as well. It just looks fantastic. But tell me, when you think about the elements that you keep in mind while designing spaces, what are those 5 elements that constantly are running, are like the precursors to your design?
First thing is being contextual, and being contextual is actually with respect to the site and with respect to the location. And then it is the sun path. So how do you reduce the heat gain into the building? And how do you facilitate natural light and natural ventilation in all parts of the building as far as possible? These are some of the key factors that govern the design for any project, whether it's a house or whether it's a large township.
Absolutely agree with you. Is there any other project that you could help us, to demonstrate your thoughts?
We have limited time, so I've only shown you one.
Okay. So before we let you go, I have one more question, which I really want to know. You always tend to experiment a lot with materials. So what is that one material that you want to explore a lot in the future?
You actually want to go back to the indigenous methods of working and building. So there is a new resort that we are doing now where we are planning to use adobe construction using villagers and the local tradition of making adobe walls. So the whole concentration now is on how do we go back to building with bamboo in a good way, in an interesting way, not necessarily in the traditional way, but something new, but with the traditional materials and the traditional methods of building. Lime plaster, bamboo, adobe construction, all of these. Of course, these are not possible across all kinds of projects, but at least the projects that you can do in them, which are low rise, one should go back to building the old way. But I think the old way was a lot more sustainable than the way we are building now.
I absolutely agree with you. So there is this constant debate about technology versus tradition. So where do you see the future of our country design going?
I think you have to marry both of them. Because let's say we just chose bamboo actually for a recent project. Now, bamboo, if you go purely traditional, there are only a few ways that they construct. But if you use technology, technology by technology, I mean software, by protection of the bamboo, those kind of things. So by software, one is able to realize that you can bend the bamboo in a certain way and you can create these kind of shapes rather than the traditional, simple, conical kind of roofs that used to be done. So you could bend bamboo in different ways. So you could create different geometries. So it's like that. So technology has to be married with tradition.
And you also are working in a lot of smaller towns, smaller cities, where I'm sure you get the chance to explore a lot of working with local communities. Is there also something that you look forward to doing a lot in the future designs that you're working on?
Yes, absolutely. So, during this COVID time, we've been building this house in Rajasthan in a village called Nokha. It's a very large house. But the interesting thing is that with the contractor, we actually employed people who have never done construction before. So it was a twofold thing. So we called them, they were trained over a period of 3 weeks, and then they were started on the project. So at a time when people did not have work and all this mass migration had happened and everybody was sitting in the villages, these people were sitting free. So, and they had no source of income. So they got a source of income. At the same time, rather than getting contractors from outside into this village to build, which would be not so economical, number one, and also not sustainable in terms of the method. So you're taking people right from there, you're training them. That's the only extra thing we did. And it works for everyone.
That sounds really nice. And I completely agree with you that, now considering the prevailing times and the situation that our country is in, I think it's very important for architects and designers to focus on local arts, local craftsmen, and especially if you're working in tier 2 cities, I'm sure the availability is much more and you can explore these opportunities for them as well. Before we sign off, Sanjay, is there a message you would like to give to young architects on how they should be designing projects in the future?
So the message is this, that keep your designs contextual, work towards creating a sustainable design approach in every step of the way, not just the design being sustainable, but the way you are going to implement it also being sustainable, but that is equally important. And for this, you will have to fight or overcome multiple hurdles. The first will be from the client themselves. The second will be finding the correct kind of contractor to do the work. The third will be the challenge of working with those kind of workers. And fourth will be getting the kind of materials that you need to make your design the way you envisaged it. But all of these are hurdles that if you truly believe in what you're doing and why you're doing it, you will be able to fight all of them and get your way and see your project through the way you envisaged it.
That's
I think that was fantastic. And each of the projects showcased today were so on point and very, very impressive. I thoroughly enjoyed all of these presentations, and I'm sure did our audience. People say that India needs iconic buildings. To me, iconic are projects that are sensitive to the requirements of the country. And each of the projects showcased today by Ravi, Arjun, Amit, Sanjay, Mr. Patel, all of you definitely fit the bill in my opinion. I'm sure the audience has a lot of questions, but due to shortage of time, we need to end this session now. But you can email the questions to us and we will try and get them answered by our panelists. Are we on for that, panelists? Thank you so much for each of you to take the time out and joining us today. Thanks a ton, each of you panelists.